Everything feels quiet for a reason. There are seasons in life when nothing outside seems to move. No clear signals, no milestones to measure, no visible progress you can point to with confidence. And in that stillness, the mind begins to question itself. You look around and wonder whether you have lost momentum, whether you missed a crucial turn somewhere along the way, whether the things you once asked for have been quietly postponed without explanation. And that doubt can feel heavy, not loud, but persistent, like a low hum beneath your thoughts, asking again and again if you are doing something wrong. But there is a truth that rarely gets spoken, especially in a world that celebrates speed, output, and constant forward motion. Not every pause is a delay. Not every silence is failure. There are moments when life is not preparing outcomes, but preparing the one who will live inside those outcomes. And that kind of preparation almost never looks like progress from the outside. When this season arrives, it often brings a strange mix of calm and discomfort. You may notice that the urgency you once relied on has faded. The drive that used to push you forward feels quieter. Goals that once felt magnetic no longer pull at you in the same way. At first, this can feel alarming. The mind labels it as laziness, loss of ambition, or even regression. But what is actually happening is far more subtle and far more intelligent. Your system is recalibrating. There are stages of growth where adding more effort would only create distortion, where building more on top of an old structure would make it unstable rather than strong. In these moments, life chooses subtraction over addition, quiet over noise, space over stimulation. This is not punishment. It is precision. From a deeper perspective, change does not begin with events. It begins with coherence. Before anything shifts in the external world, the internal state that will hold it must become stable enough to sustain it. This is why what you once desired can feel strangely distant right before it becomes possible. Because the version of you who asked for it is not the version who will live inside it. And between those two versions, there is a necessary in-between space. In this space, motivation driven by reward chemicals softens. The old loops that once kept you moving lose their grip, not because you are failing, but because you are no longer meant to be driven that way. The nervous system begins to loosen its predictions. The mind releases some of its familiar reference points, and what emerges can feel like neutrality, a kind of emotional flatness that is often misunderstood. But neutrality is not emptiness. It is fertile ground. It is the state where the system becomes flexible again, where it is no longer locked into repeating what it already knows. It is where new probabilities can reorganize without being immediately rejected by old expectations. This is why the quiet can feel uncomfortable. You are no longer anchored to who you were, but you have not fully embodied who you are becoming. There is nothing to chase and nothing obvious to fix. And for a system that equates movement with safety, this can feel deeply unsettling. So many people try to escape this phase. They force new goals, pile on affirmations, manufacture urgency, anything to recreate the feeling of progress. But this intervention often pulls them back into the very frequency they were meant to outgrow. Life responds not to effort, but to compatibility. When you interfere too soon, you signal that the old identity is still in charge. And the larger shift waits, not as a punishment, but as a form of accuracy. Trust, in this phase, does not look like optimism. It does not mean convincing yourself that something good is coming. It means resisting the urge to constantly check, monitor, and demand reassurance. The universe does not test trust with chaos. It tests it with stillness, and stillness can feel unbearable if you are used to reading meaning through motion. The absence of signs can trigger overthinking, overdoing, and quiet panic, all in an attempt to regain control. But control is not what allows the next phase to arrive. Presence does. Before outcomes solidify, identity must stabilize. If the internal sense of self is still oscillating between hope and doubt, between desire and vigilance, whatever arrives will feel unsafe and will quickly collapse. This is why preparation focuses on reducing urgency rather than increasing belief, on deepening presence rather than visualizing harder, on relaxing control rather than proving readiness. You may notice a subtle boredom or mild disinterest in old pursuits. This is not depression. It is often the ego losing its familiar hooks. When old patterns stop producing excitement or fear, the identity attached to them begins to loosen. This can feel like a loss, but it is actually a release. Reality does not come to convince you. It comes when you are compatible with it. When you are no longer oscillating between wanting and doubting. When you are not watching the future with suspicion. When you are not bracing for disappointment disguised as caution. And when preparation is complete, something surprising happens. You stop waiting, not because you gave up, but because waiting is no longer your posture. There is less desperation, less reaction, less need to control. What you once called manifestation does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives like the most obvious next step, natural, unforced, almost ordinary. The collapse happens not because you pushed, but because you stopped shaking the system with vigilance that looked like doubt. If you are in a quiet season right now, if life feels slower and less dramatic than you expected, consider the possibility that nothing has gone wrong. Consider that you may be standing in a calibration phase, where the inner architecture is being adjusted so that what you asked for can actually stay when it arrives. What you desired was not denied. It was not delayed. It is waiting for an identity that can live inside it without fear, without constant checking, without needing proof every day that it is real. Preparation completes, not when evidence appears, but when you stop asking for evidence. If everything feels still, it may not be emptiness. It may be the quiet intelligence of life rearranging itself so that nothing collapses under the weight of arrival. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared. And when that preparation finishes, you will not feel shocked or overwhelmed. You will feel ready in a way that does not need explanation. Until then, allow the quiet to do its work. It knows what it is doing. 1. When old motivation disappears, you are not losing direction. There comes a moment in many lives, often after years of effort, learning, and persistence, when the familiar engine that once drove everything begins to quiet down. And at first this feels unsettling because motivation has long been treated as proof that you are alive, moving, and on track. You may notice that goals which once pulled you out of bed before sunrise no longer carry the same charge, that the hunger you used to rely on has softened, that pushing yourself feels heavier than it used to, not because you suddenly became incapable, but because something deeper is changing. The mind is quick to judge this shift. It whispers that you are losing ambition, that you are becoming complacent, that something essential has gone missing. But these interpretations come from an outdated framework, one that assumes growth must always look like striving, and that forward movement must always feel urgent. What is actually happening is not a loss of direction, but a recalibration of the internal system that determines how and why you move. There are seasons when motivation fueled by pressure, reward, fear, or external validation simply stops working, not because you failed to sustain it, but because you have grown beyond the stage of consciousness that required it. The same fuel that once moved you forward now creates friction instead of momentum. Think of it like a car that has outgrown the engine it was built with. The engine did its job. It carried you across difficult terrain, through uncertainty, through phases where effort was the only available strategy. But as the journey changes, the old engine begins to strain, not because the road is wrong, but because the system is ready for a different mode of movement. This is why trying to revive old motivation rarely works during this phase. You can force yourself for a while, but it feels hollow. The excitement does not return. The sense of meaning does not deepen. And instead of feeling empowered, you feel drained. This exhaustion is not a signal to try harder. It is a signal to listen more carefully. At a deeper level, your nervous system is shifting away from survival-based motivation towards something quieter and more sustainable. Survival motivation relies on urgency. It uses pressure to create motion. It thrives on the idea that something is missing and must be chased. But there comes a point where this mode becomes incompatible with who you are becoming. It keeps you moving, but it also keeps you tense. It keeps you productive, but it prevents you from being present. And eventually, your system begins to resist it, not as rebellion, but as wisdom. This resistance often shows up as apathy or disinterest. But those words miss the nuance of what is happening. You are not indifferent. You are discerning. Your inner system is asking a more refined question now. Not how do I get there faster, but why am I moving this way at all? When that question arises, old goals lose their grip because they were built to answer an earlier version of you. They were aligned with needs that no longer dominate your awareness. So the energy naturally withdraws. This is where many people panic and attempt to manufacture motivation, believing that movement itself is the point. They add new targets, new routines, new disciplines, hoping to recreate the feeling of progress. But this often deepens the disconnect because it ignores the intelligence of the pause. Recalibration requires space. When the internal system realizes that the old pattern no longer fits, it slows everything down, not to stop you, but to prevent you from locking into a future that no longer matches your true trajectory. It is like a navigation system recalculating after you have taken a turn that changed the entire route. During this recalibration, the absence of familiar motivation can feel like emptiness. But emptiness is not the same as stagnation. Emptiness is potential without direction yet. This is a vulnerable phase because it removes the scaffolding that once held your sense of identity together. If you defined yourself as the one who always pushes, always strives, always stays ahead, then who are you when that drive softens? The mind wants to answer quickly, to restore certainty. But this phase does not respond to quick answers. It responds to patience. You may notice that instead of chasing goals, you are becoming more sensitive to what feels aligned and what does not. Your body reacts more clearly to pressure. Your tolerance for meaningless effort decreases. You become less willing to sacrifice your well-being for momentum alone. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of maturation. True direction does not always announce itself with excitement. Sometimes, it emerges as a quiet no to what once felt necessary. Sometimes it appears as disinterest in paths that no longer reflect your inner state. The problem is that modern culture does not honor this kind of intelligence. It labels slowing down as falling behind. It praises constant hunger and mistrusts contentment. So when your system naturally begins to shift gears, you are left without a model to understand what is happening. But if you look closely at your own life, you may recognize that the most meaningful transitions were preceded by a loss of old motivation. The job you eventually left stopped energizing you long before you admitted it. The relationship you outgrew felt heavy before you understood why. The identity you shed became exhausting before it dissolved. This pattern is not accidental. Energy withdraws before form changes. What you are experiencing now is the same principle, applied at a deeper level of consciousness. The old way of running toward life is losing its relevance because a new way of relating to life is forming. This does not mean you will never feel motivated again. It means motivation will no longer come from lack, fear, or pressure. It will arise from resonance, from clarity, from a sense of inner agreement, rather than inner demand. That kind of motivation feels different. It does not shout. It does not rush. It does not require constant stimulation to stay alive. It feels like being drawn rather than pushed. But before that kind of movement can emerge, the system needs to let go of the old fuel. It needs to experience what it is like to not be driven by urgency, to not be defined by pursuit, to not measure itself by output alone. This is why this phase can feel disorienting. You are between engines. The old one is shutting down. The new one has not yet fully engaged. If you try to force clarity too soon, you interrupt the transition. If you try to revive the old drive, you prolong the discomfort. But if you allow the recalibration to complete, something steadier begins to form. Direction returns, but it does not look like pressure. Purpose reappears, but it does not feel like a chase. Action resumes, but it is guided by alignment rather than anxiety. So if you find yourself less compelled by goals that once defined you, pause before judging yourself. Ask instead whether those goals were built for who you were, not who you are now. The disappearance of old motivation is not a loss of direction. It is a sign that direction is being rewritten at a deeper level. And when it settles, you will not feel the need to push yourself forward. You will feel quietly ready to move. That readiness will not come with urgency. It will come with a sense of inner permission, a calm knowing that the next step does not require force. Until then, let the old drive rest. It has carried you far enough. What comes next will not need to shout to be real. 2. Preparation is not about adding more. It is about letting go. There is a phase of preparation that feels nothing like what we were taught to expect, because instead of excitement, momentum, or visible progress, it arrives as emptiness, as quiet, as a strange absence of drama that leaves the mind searching for something to hold on to. This stage can feel unsettling precisely because it does not reward effort in familiar ways. And for those who have learned to measure growth by accumulation, by doing more, learning more, achieving more, the experience of having things stripped away can feel like regression rather than refinement. You may notice that life feels less intense than it used to. Fewer emotional highs and lows, less urgency, less inner noise. At first glance, this can feel like stagnation, as though something essential has gone missing. But what is actually happening is not loss, it is subtraction. And subtraction is one of the most intelligent forms of preparation there is. A new reality cannot rest on an unstable identity. It cannot sustain itself on a system that is overloaded with old beliefs, outdated coping strategies, and emotional patterns that once served a purpose but no longer belong. Before something new can be built, the excess weight must be removed, not as punishment, but as a matter of structural integrity. Think of it like renovating a house that has been added onto again and again over the years. Each addition may have solved a problem at the time, but eventually the structure becomes strained, the foundation uneven, the space cluttered with things that no longer serve the life being lived inside it. At some point, progress no longer comes from adding another room, but from clearing out what is no longer necessary. This clearing rarely feels productive. There is no applause for empty space. There is no immediate payoff for letting go. And yet, without that space, nothing new can truly take root. During this phase, the ego often panics because it equates value with accumulation. If you are not gaining skills, insights, or achievements, it assumes you are falling behind. If you are not constantly improving yourself, it assumes you are wasting time. But these assumptions come from a mindset that does not understand cycles, only forward motion. Preparation works differently. Preparation removes what would interfere with coherence. You may notice that certain desires fade without explanation. Conversations that once energized you feel empty. Old habits lose their appeal. Even spiritual practices or self-improvement routines that once felt meaningful may begin to feel mechanical or unnecessary. This is not a failure of commitment. It is a sign that your system no longer needs those structures to regulate itself. What is being dismantled here is not your potential, but your dependency on external scaffolding. The internal system is learning how to stand on its own, without constant stimulation, without borrowed meaning, without identities that require effort to maintain. This can feel like losing your edge, like becoming less driven, like stepping out of the race while others keep running. But what is actually happening is a reorientation away from force and toward alignment. A system that is always in motion has no time to integrate. A life that is always building has no room to breathe. And a consciousness that is always adding cannot recognize what is already enough. Subtraction creates stability. When layers fall away, the nervous system begins to relax. When expectations soften, perception widens. When urgency dissolves, presence deepens. These shifts do not announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, often beneath the threshold of conscious recognition. You may simply notice that you are less reactive than before, that you do not chase reassurance the way you used to. That silence feels more tolerable, even comforting at times. This is not emptiness in the sense of lack. It is emptiness in the sense of readiness. Just as a cup must be empty to receive water, identity must have space to receive a new way of being. If it is already full of stories about who you must be, how life should work, and what you need to prove, there is nowhere for something new to land. Many people try to manifest a new life while carrying the same internal clutter, and when it does not work, they assume the problem is belief or effort. But often, the issue is capacity. There is simply too much already occupying the system. Preparation reduces load. It removes the need to constantly define yourself. It loosens attachment to outcomes. It dismantles the subtle pressure to always be becoming something more. This is why this phase can feel disorienting. You are not being given new answers. You are being relieved of old questions. Without those questions, the mind does not know what to do. It searches for the familiar tension of striving. It looks for a problem to solve. It may even create anxiety just to feel active again. But anxiety here is not a warning. It is withdrawal from an identity that thrived on effort. If you allow this process to continue without interference, something remarkable begins to happen. The internal environment becomes simpler, clearer, more stable. Decisions become easier, not because you have more information, but because there is less noise. Choices feel more obvious, not because they are dramatic, but because they are no longer competing with outdated demands. This simplicity is often mistaken for boredom, but boredom is what the ego feels when it is no longer being entertained by struggle. It is what remains when the system is no longer chasing stimulation to feel alive. In truth, this simplicity is grounding. It allows you to sense what actually matters rather than what merely feels urgent. It reconnects you with a quieter form of intelligence, one that does not push or pull, but gently orients you toward what is aligned. New forms cannot emerge in chaos. They require coherence. They require a stable baseline. They require an identity that is not constantly negotiating its worth. That is why space is created first. Only after the unnecessary has been released can the essential reveal itself. Only after the noise has quieted can the signal be heard. Only after the system has lightened can it support something larger without collapsing. This is not a phase you rush through. It is a phase you allow. You do not need to replace what is falling away. You do not need to immediately define what comes next. The urge to fill the space is understandable, but it is also the very thing that delays what is trying to emerge. Trust that what is being removed was never meant to stay forever. It did its job. It carried you to this threshold. Now, preparation asks for a different kind of participation. Not effort, but restraint. Not action, but permission. Not accumulation, but release. The emptiness you feel is not a void to be feared. It is a clearing. And clearings exist for one reason only: to make room for something that cannot arrive while the space is full. What is coming does not need you to build more. It needs you to carry less. And when the space is ready, form will follow, naturally, quietly, without force. This is not the absence of progress. It is progress in its most invisible and most essential form. 3. The quantum field does not respond to desire. It responds to coherence. There is a subtle misunderstanding that quietly frustrates many sincere seekers, especially those who have spent years visualizing, affirming, and asking for change with genuine hope, because the assumption is simple and seemingly logical. If I want something deeply enough and focus on it consistently, reality should respond. And when it does not, the mind looks for reasons, questioning belief, discipline, worthiness, or timing, rarely suspecting that the real mechanism at work operates on a different principle altogether. The quantum field does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are consistent with. When you ask for change, something important does happen, but it is not always what the mind expects. You do not immediately activate a chain of external events designed to deliver a result. You activate a reorganization of probabilities, a subtle rearranging of what can and cannot coherently appear in your lived experience. This distinction matters because probabilities do not collapse into stable reality unless the internal state of the observer can sustain them. Reality is not simply delivered. It is stabilized. If the internal system is fragmented, oscillating between hope and doubt, desire and vigilance, trust and control, the field does not punish you by withholding outcomes. It simply does not lock them in. Coherence is the deciding factor. Coherence means alignment across levels. It means that what you think, what you feel, how your nervous system is regulated, and how you expect life to respond are not pulling in different directions. It does not require perfection. It requires consistency. This is why someone can visualize abundance while their body remains braced for scarcity, and nothing changes. The signal being sent is mixed. The field reads the stronger, more stable frequency, not the louder thought. Your internal state is not defined by the words you repeat, but by the posture you hold toward life. Do you expect support or do you scan for threat? Do you move from trust or from vigilance? Do you feel fundamentally safe or fundamentally on guard? These signals are continuous. They do not switch off when you stop thinking about them. They form the background field of your existence, and the quantum field responds to that background, not to isolated moments of desire. This is why asking is not the same as receiving. Asking initiates a process. Receiving requires compatibility. When you ask for change, the field begins to reorganize probability in your favor. But if your inner system remains tied to an older identity, the probabilities cannot settle. They flicker. They appear briefly and disappear. Opportunities arise and collapse. Momentum builds and then dissolves. This pattern is not random. It is diagnostic. It reveals that the internal environment is not yet stable enough to hold what is being invited. Many people interpret this as failure or bad luck, but it is neither. It is feedback. The quantum field is precise. It does not overdeliver. It does not overwhelm the system. It does not place you into a reality you would immediately destabilize through fear, control, or self-sabotage. So the field waits. Not passively, intelligently. It waits for coherence. This waiting period often feels like nothing is happening, but in truth, everything that matters is happening internally. Old expectations are being loosened. Emotional reflexes are being softened. The nervous system is learning new baselines. This internal shift cannot be rushed, because coherence is not something you force. It is something that emerges when resistance decreases. Desire alone is not enough, because desire can coexist with fear. Hope alone is not enough, because hope can coexist with doubt. Even belief is not enough, because belief can remain intellectual while the body stays guarded. Coherence requires that these layers begin to agree. This is why practices that focus solely on thinking often plateau. They address the surface while leaving the deeper patterns untouched. The field does not respond to the surface. It responds to the sum total of your state. Consider how often people say they want peace while structuring their lives around urgency. How often they say they want abundance while expecting disappointment. How often they say they want love while remaining emotionally defended. The words and the state do not match. The signal is incoherent. The quantum field does not judge this. It does not reward or punish. It simply mirrors coherence back into form. When the inner state changes, not through effort, but through regulation and integration, the probabilities that were once unstable begin to settle. Events line up without force. Timing feels natural rather than strained. Outcomes arrive without the sense that they must be guarded or managed. This is what collapse actually looks like. Not a dramatic arrival, but a quiet locking in of what already feels normal inside. Inner change always precedes outer change, not because the universe is testing you, but because reality must be sustainable. Anything that arrives before coherence will either feel unsafe or fall apart. This is why some people achieve what they wanted and immediately feel anxious, dissatisfied, or disconnected. The result arrived before the internal state could hold it. The identity lagged behind the outcome. From the perspective of the quantum field, this is inefficiency. So it delays not to frustrate, but to synchronize. You may notice during this phase that your focus shifts away from wanting and toward stabilizing. You care less about forcing results and more about how you are being. You become more sensitive to internal friction. You notice when something feels misaligned rather than exciting. These are signs of increasing coherence. Coherence does not mean you stop wanting. It means wanting no longer destabilizes you. It means the desire does not pull you out of presence or into control. When coherence increases, the question shifts from, when will it happen, to can I live as if it is already safe? Not safe in the sense of guaranteed, but safe in the sense of not threatening your nervous system. This is the work most people overlook. They aim their attention at outcomes, rather than at the internal conditions that allow outcomes to stay. The quantum field is not impressed by intensity. It responds to steadiness. It does not need you to believe harder. It needs you to become congruent. Congruence is quiet. It does not announce itself with excitement. It feels like reduced urgency, like fewer emotional spikes, like less need to check, confirm, or control. From this place, probability collapses naturally. The external world begins to follow the internal state, not because you made it, but because it finally has something stable to land on. This is why patience is not passive in this process. It is active regulation. It is the willingness to let your system complete its reorganization without rushing ahead of itself. It is the choice to value internal stability over external proof. When coherence is present, outcomes do not feel miraculous. They feel appropriate. They arrive without shock. They integrate rather than disrupt. And this is the clearest sign that something has truly shifted. The quantum field did not respond to your wanting. It responded to your becoming. You did not attract something new. You stabilized a state that allowed something to stay. This is why the inner change must come first, not as a test, not as a requirement, but as a necessity. Reality does not move ahead of you. It moves with you. When you and your inner system are ready to live in a certain frequency without resistance, that frequency no longer remains potential. It becomes experience. Until then, nothing is wrong. The probabilities are reorganizing. And when coherence completes, the outer world follows quietly, precisely, and without effort. Not because you asked louder, but because you finally matched what you asked for. 4. Neutrality is not emptiness. It is fertile ground. There is a moment in this journey that often confuses even the most sincere and self-aware people. A moment when the familiar emotional charge begins to fade, when the highs are not as high, the lows not as dramatic, and the inner landscape settles into something quieter, flatter, and harder to label. When this happens, the mind reacts quickly, because it has been trained to associate intensity with aliveness, and it names this state stagnation, numbness, or loss of passion, assuming something essential has gone wrong. But from the perspective of the nervous system, something very different is taking place. When dopamine-driven motivation decreases, when the push that once came from urgency, reward, or fear no longer dominates, the system is not shutting down. It is opening up. Dopamine-based motivation is excellent for survival, for short-term goals, for bursts of effort that require focus and drive. But it is also narrow. It locks attention onto prediction, outcome, and reward. It keeps the system oriented toward what is next rather than what is now. There comes a point in development where this mode becomes limiting rather than helpful. It keeps you chasing signals instead of sensing alignment. It trains you to move only when stimulated rather than when something is truly coherent. When that chemical push softens, the mind panics because it loses its familiar reference point. Without urgency, it does not know how to measure progress. Without excitement or anxiety, it does not know how to interpret meaning. So it calls neutrality emptiness. But neutrality is not absence. It is availability. From a neurological perspective, neutrality is one of the most flexible states a system can occupy. When the brain is no longer locked into prediction loops driven by reward or threat, it becomes more adaptable, more receptive, more capable of updating its internal models of reality. Old expectations loosen, rigid forecasts soften. The system stops insisting that the future must resemble the past. This is why neutrality can feel uncomfortable. It removes certainty. It removes narrative. It removes the emotional spikes that once told you who you were and where you were going. For an identity built on momentum, neutrality feels like free fall. But free fall is only dangerous when you are resisting it. When you relax into it, it becomes suspension, a state where movement is possible in any direction, not just the one you have been forcing. Think of fertile soil. It does not announce itself with activity. It looks dark, quiet, and unremarkable. And yet, it is precisely this quality that allows new life to emerge. If the soil were constantly disturbed, constantly turned over, constantly forced into motion, nothing would take root. Neutrality is the soil of consciousness. It is the state where the system is no longer dominated by old drives, but has not yet crystallized into new ones. It is where the nervous system pauses long enough to reassess what is actually needed, rather than what has always been done. This pause is not accidental. It is protective. When the system senses that a major update is required, it temporarily reduces stimulation. It dampens extremes. It creates a neutral field so that new patterns can be tested without immediately triggering old reactions. The mind, however, does not trust this process. It prefers familiar discomfort to unfamiliar calm. So it searches for something to fix, something to improve, something to reignite intensity, because intensity feels like control. But control is not what allows evolution. Flexibility does. Neutrality allows flexibility because it is not anchored to a specific outcome. It does not demand that things happen quickly or dramatically. It allows information to come in without immediately categorizing it as good or bad. In this state, perception widens. You begin to notice subtleties that were invisible when you were driven by urgency. You sense when something is slightly off rather than obviously wrong. You feel drawn toward what is resonant rather than what is impressive. This is not numbness. It is refinement. The emotional flatness people fear in neutrality is often the absence of unnecessary drama. When the nervous system no longer needs spikes to regulate itself, it settles into a steadier rhythm. That steadiness can feel unfamiliar if your baseline was once chaos or intensity. But steadiness is not deadness. It is capacity. From this place, new motivation can emerge. Not from lack or fear, but from clarity. Not from dopamine spikes, but from coherence. This kind of motivation feels quieter, more grounded, and more sustainable. It does not burn you out. It does not require constant reinforcement, but it cannot emerge until the old chemical loops have loosened. This is why neutrality often appears right before significant internal shifts. The system is clearing space. It is suspending old reactions. It is waiting for a new organizing principle to take shape. Many people interrupt this phase because they misinterpret it. They try to feel something, anything, to escape the quiet. They stimulate themselves with new goals, new dramas, new distractions, mistaking activity for aliveness. But aliveness does not require intensity. It requires presence. Neutrality is presence without agenda. It allows you to sit with experience without immediately reaching for meaning. It allows life to speak without being interrupted by interpretation. It allows the system to update without being overridden by habit. This is why neutrality is fertile. It is not empty of life. It is empty of interference. If you find yourself in this state, if you feel less driven, less reactive, less emotionally charged, resist the urge to label it as something wrong. Ask instead what is no longer necessary, what beliefs no longer feel compelling, what goals no longer feel true, what patterns no longer activate you. These questions do not need immediate answers. They are meant to sit in the soil, to be absorbed rather than solved. Over time, something begins to reorganize. New interests emerge gently. New directions feel obvious rather than urgent. New forms of engagement arise without force. This is not because you pushed your way through neutrality. It is because you allowed it to do its work. From the outside, it may look like nothing was happening. From the inside, the entire system was becoming more flexible, more coherent, more ready to receive what could not arrive, while the old patterns were in control. Neutrality does not mean you have lost your spark. It means the old spark no longer needs to burn so brightly to keep you moving. What comes next will not rely on stimulation to exist. It will be rooted in alignment, and alignment does not shout. It grows quietly, steadily, from ground that was allowed to rest. So if your inner world feels neutral right now, trust that you are not empty. You are fertile. Something is preparing to grow, and it needs this stillness to take shape. Do not rush to fill the space. Let it remain open. This ground knows what it is doing. When the new form is ready, it will emerge naturally, without force, without urgency, without needing to prove that it is real. Until then, neutrality is not the absence of life. It is life reorganizing itself at the deepest level. 5. You are standing between two identities. There is a particular place on the inner journey that very few people talk about honestly, not because it is rare, but because it is difficult to describe without sounding uncertain, and uncertainty has long been mistaken for weakness. This is the place where you are no longer who you used to be, yet you have not fully anchored into who you are becoming. And the mind struggles here because there is no clear role to play, no familiar identity to lean on, no obvious direction to run toward. You can feel it in subtle ways. The old labels do not fit anymore. The old motivations feel hollow. The old stories you told yourself about who you are and how life works no longer feel convincing. And yet, when you look ahead, the new version of yourself has not fully taken shape either. There is no solid ground to stand on, only this open, undefined space. This in-between state is deeply uncomfortable for a system that learned early on that movement equals safety. If you grew up in an environment where staying alert, staying busy, or staying ahead was necessary to avoid pain or loss, then stillness can feel like danger. When there is no clear goal to pursue and nothing obvious to fix, the nervous system does not relax. It panics. The panic does not always show up as fear. Sometimes it shows up as restlessness, sometimes as irritation, sometimes as a quiet sense that something must be wrong, even when nothing obvious is. The mind begins to search for something to do, something to improve, something to chase, because activity has long been its way of maintaining a sense of control. But this phase is not asking for control. It is asking for tolerance. Tolerance for ambiguity. Tolerance for not knowing. Tolerance for being undefined. When you are between identities, there is no external reference point to reassure you. You cannot point to progress in the usual ways. You cannot measure success. You cannot explain clearly to yourself or others what you are becoming. This is why the in-between space often feels lonely, even if you are surrounded by people. Others may still relate to the old version of you. They may expect the same reactions, the same priorities, the same patterns. But inside, something has shifted, and responding from the old identity feels dishonest. At the same time, responding from the new identity feels premature, because it has not fully settled. You may sense it intuitively, but you cannot yet live it consistently. So you hover, neither here nor there. This hovering can feel like being suspended over open ground, with no instructions and no timeline. And for a system that equates certainty with safety, this feels intolerable. The temptation in this phase is to rush the transition, to grab onto a new label, a new role, a new mission, just to restore a sense of direction, to declare a new identity before it has been embodied, simply to escape the discomfort of being undefined. But identities formed this way tend to be brittle. They look convincing on the surface, but they lack integration. They are chosen by the mind to relieve anxiety, not by the whole system as a true reflection of being. The in-between phase exists for a reason. It is the space where old attachments dissolve before new ones solidify. It is where the nervous system learns that safety does not require constant motion. It is where identity is allowed to reorganize at a deeper level than conscious choice. In this space, there is often nothing to do, no clear task, no obvious improvement to make, and that absence can feel terrifying to a system that once survived by fixing, striving, and adapting. But the absence of tasks does not mean the absence of work. It means the work has moved beneath the surface. Just as a caterpillar does not actively build the butterfly, but dissolves into something unrecognizable before reorganizing, identity transformation requires a period where the old form no longer functions, and the new form is not yet visible. From the outside, this looks like collapse. From the inside, it feels like disorientation. But this disorientation is not a mistake. It is the mechanism. When the old identity dissolves, it releases the energy that was used to maintain it. That energy does not disappear. It becomes available for something new, but before it can be directed, it must be unbound. This unbinding feels like emptiness, because the mind is used to defining itself through action and achievement. Without those reference points, it does not know who it is. Yet this is precisely where something more authentic can emerge. The in-between space strips away performance. It removes the pressure to be someone specific. It exposes what remains when you are no longer trying to prove, fix, or become. What remains is awareness, presence, a quieter sense of self that does not need to be constantly reinforced. This is why the in-between phase often coincides with increased sensitivity. You may find yourself less tolerant of noise, drama, or superficial engagement. You may crave simplicity without knowing why. You may feel drawn to silence, nature, or solitude, not as escape, but as refuge. These are signs that your system is reorganizing around a deeper center. At the same time, old fears may surface. Fears of being left behind, fears of wasting time, fears of losing relevance or momentum. These fears are not warnings. They are echoes of an identity that is losing its authority. The mind will argue that without clear direction, you will drift. But drifting is not the same as dissolving. Drifting allows you to feel the currents. It allows you to sense where life is actually moving you, rather than where you think you should go. In the in-between space, intuition becomes more important than intention. Subtle cues matter more than grand plans. You begin to notice what feels heavier and what feels lighter, even when you cannot explain why. This is how the new identity begins to form, not as a concept, but as a felt sense. It is shaped by resonance rather than ambition, by alignment rather than urgency, but it cannot be rushed. If you try to force the new identity before the old one has fully released, you create inner conflict. Part of you will still operate from the old patterns, while another part tries to perform a new role. This split drains energy and creates confusion. The in-between phase prevents this by refusing to offer clarity too soon. It insists that you stay with the discomfort long enough for the old structures to truly fall away. It teaches the nervous system that stillness is not dangerous, that not knowing is survivable, that safety does not depend on constant movement. This lesson is not learned intellectually. It is learned somatically, through repeated experiences of being in uncertainty and discovering that nothing collapses. Over time, the fear softens, the urgency fades, the compulsion to define yourself relaxes, and then, almost without noticing, the new identity begins to crystallize, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a natural orientation. You start making choices differently without forcing yourself. You respond to life from a place that feels more congruent, even if you cannot yet articulate why. This is how identity truly changes, not through declaration, not through affirmation, but through lived tolerance of the in-between. You are not failing because you feel unanchored. You are in transition, and transition, by nature, feels groundless. If you are standing between who you were and who you are becoming, do not rush to escape this space. It is doing essential work. It is teaching your system that safety is not dependent on identity, that worth is not tied to roles, that being does not require constant becoming. This space will not last forever, but while it is here, it deserves your patience rather than your panic. You are not lost. You are unforming, and unforming is the necessary step before anything truly new can take shape. When the new identity arrives, it will not feel like something you decided. It will feel like something that finally fits. Until then, allow yourself to stand in the in-between, without labels, without goals, without rushing the outcome. This is not the absence of direction. It is direction reorganizing itself from the inside out. 6. The greatest mistake is interfering with the silence. There is a moment on this path when the absence of visible results begins to feel unbearable. Not because nothing is happening, but because the mind has been trained to equate movement with value and noise with progress. When days pass without confirmation, when the outer world offers no clear feedback, the impulse to intervene becomes strong, almost automatic, as if doing something, anything, would be safer than staying with the quiet. So many people respond to this silence by forcing motivation back into place. They add more affirmations, repeating words that once felt empowering, but now sound hollow. They create new goals, not because those goals feel true, but because goals give the mind something to manage. They increase activity, not from alignment, but from discomfort with stillness, needing proof that they are not falling behind. On the surface, this looks responsible. It looks like discipline. It looks like commitment. But beneath it, there is often fear. Fear of wasting time. Fear of missing a window. Fear that if nothing is happening, something must be wrong. This fear is understandable. For many people, effort once kept them safe. Action once prevented collapse. Staying busy once meant staying in control. But there comes a stage where the strategies that once protected you begin to interfere with the very shift you are asking for. Silence, in this phase, is not an absence of activity. It is a precise condition. When the system enters a quiet phase, it is often because it is recalibrating at a level that conscious effort cannot access. Patterns are being loosened. Expectations are being reorganized. The nervous system is learning new baselines that cannot be installed through force. Intervening here is like interrupting a complex internal process because it does not look productive from the outside. Imagine a seed underground. There is no visible movement, no sign of growth, and yet, everything required for emergence is unfolding beneath the surface. If you dig it up repeatedly to check whether it is growing, you do not speed up the process. you damage it. The same principle applies here. When you force yourself into action during a phase meant for integration, you pull energy back into old patterns. You re-engage identities that rely on urgency. You reactivate nervous system states that equate safety with control. And the quantum field responds accordingly. Not with punishment, not with withdrawal, but with pause. The field reads coherence, not intention. When you intervene from anxiety rather than alignment, the signal shifts. The internal state no longer matches what you asked for. So the process slows, not to frustrate you, but to prevent distortion. This is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They assume that silence means they are being tested or ignored. They double down on effort, believing persistence is the answer. But persistence applied at the wrong level becomes interference. Silence is often a sign that the system needs time without input. During these phases, the most effective thing you can do is not to add, but to refrain. Not to stimulate, but to stabilize. Not to convince, but to allow. This feels counterintuitive because it goes against everything most of us were taught about achievement and change. We were taught that effort equals progress, that consistency means doing more, that rest must be earned through productivity. But internal transformation does not follow the same rules as external accomplishment. The mind wants to manage the process. It wants to ensure that nothing is being missed. It wants to feel useful. So, it creates tasks. It adds practices. It introduces structure where none is required. Yet the silence does not respond to management. It responds to respect. When you leave it alone, something remarkable happens. The nervous system begins to settle into a deeper regulation. Without constant stimulation, it recalibrates its sense of safety. Without constant effort, it releases the belief that survival requires struggle. This release cannot occur while you are constantly pushing. It requires space. Interference delays coherence because it reinforces the old relationship with life. The one where you must do something to deserve movement, to deserve response, to deserve support. But what you are learning here is a different truth, that some shifts only occur when you stop trying to make them happen. This does not mean passivity. It means discernment. There is a difference between inspired action and anxious action. Inspired action arises naturally, without urgency. It feels simple, obvious, and grounded. Anxious action feels heavy, compulsive, and driven by the need to escape discomfort. Silence exposes this difference clearly. When you intervene from anxiety, the body tightens, the breath shortens, the mind narrows. The system returns to familiar patterns of control. When you allow silence, the body softens, the breath deepens, the mind becomes less reactive. The system begins to trust that it does not need to be constantly directed. This trust is not intellectual, it is somatic, and it is essential. Because the outcomes you are asking for require a system that can receive without panic. They require an identity that does not immediately question its worthiness. They require a nervous system that does not collapse into vigilance at the first sign of uncertainty. Silence trains this capacity. By not intervening, you teach your system that nothing bad happens when you stop managing. You teach it that stillness is survivable. You teach it that value does not disappear when effort pauses. This lesson is subtle but profound. Many people sabotage this stage because they cannot tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. They mistake discomfort for danger. They confuse uncertainty with failure, so they act. But action taken to escape discomfort does not move you forward. It brings you back to old identities, back to old frequencies, back to old cycles. The quantum field recognizes this immediately. It does not respond by taking something away. It simply waits. It waits for the signal to stabilize again. It waits for coherence to return. This waiting can feel like being stuck, but it is not stagnation. It is alignment checking itself. When you finally stop intervening, not as a strategy but as a surrender to what is already happening, the system completes its adjustment. The silence begins to feel less threatening. The urge to force diminishes. A deeper sense of trust emerges. Not because you decided to trust, but because your body learned that it was safe to do so. And then, often without warning, movement resumes. Not frantic movement, not dramatic action, but clear, grounded steps that feel right without needing justification. This is how the next phase arrives. Not through effort layered on top of effort, but through precision. Silence is precise. It strips away what does not belong. It recalibrates what has been distorted. It prepares the system for what cannot arrive while noise dominates. If you find yourself tempted to interfere, to add more practices, more goals, more doing, pause and ask what is actually driving that urge. Is it inspiration? Or is it fear of stillness? Is it alignment? Or is it the need to feel in control? There is nothing wrong with action, but action that interrupts integration delays the very thing you are waiting for. The silence is not empty. It is active in ways you cannot see. Your only task in this phase is to not get in the way. Not because you are powerless, but because the intelligence guiding this process does not need your management. It needs your cooperation. And cooperation, in this moment, looks like restraint. It looks like patience. It looks like trusting that not all movement is visible and not all progress is loud. When you stop interfering, the silence completes its work. And when it does, what follows will not require force. It will arrive with a quiet sense of rightness, as if it had always been on its way and simply needed you to stop pulling it off course. The greatest mistake is not the silence itself. It is believing that you must interrupt it to remain safe. You do not. The silence knows exactly what it is doing. 7. Trust is not hope. It is the absence of surveillance. There is a quiet misunderstanding around the word trust that causes many sincere people to exhaust themselves without realizing why. Because trust is often confused with optimism, with positive thinking, or with the act of convincing oneself that everything will turn out well. But real trust does not require you to imagine a happy ending or to hold a bright picture in your mind. Real trust begins much deeper than thought, and it shows itself not in what you believe, but in what you stop monitoring. Hope still watches the horizon. Hope still checks for signs. Hope still asks, often silently, is it working yet? Trust does not. Trust is the moment when you no longer feel the need to supervise the process, not because you are certain of the outcome, but because your system has stopped treating uncertainty as a threat. It is not an emotional high. It is a release of vigilance. Many people say they trust, but their bodies tell a different story. They wake up scanning for evidence. They replay conversations for hidden meaning. They track timing, patterns, synchronicities, delays. They analyze silence as if it were a message that must be decoded. This is not trust. This is surveillance disguised as faith. And surveillance is exhausting. The nervous system cannot relax while it is constantly checking. Even if the thoughts sound positive, the underlying posture is still one of guarding, waiting, and bracing. The system remains on alert, and alertness communicates one thing to life above all else: that something might go wrong. This is why trust is not proven in moments of chaos. Chaos demands action. Chaos justifie vigilance. Chaos gives the mind something to do. True trust is tested in quiet, when nothing happens, when no signs appear, when there is no confirmation, no feedback, no reassurance. The universe does not test you with storms. It tests you with stillness. Stillness reveals whether you can remain settled without stimulation, whether you can stay grounded without validation, whether you can allow time to pass without interpreting it as a verdict on your worth or your path. For many people, this is unbearable. The absence of signals creates a vacuum, and the mind rushes in to fill it. It starts asking questions. It starts replaying intentions. It starts wondering whether something was done incorrectly. It starts adjusting, tweaking, fixing, just to feel involved again. Overthinking is rarely about thinking too much. It is about being unable to tolerate not knowing, and not knowing feels unsafe to a system that learned early on that safety came from anticipation, prediction, and control. So when the universe becomes quiet, the system interprets it as danger, not because it is dangerous, but because it is unfamiliar. This is where trust asks for something radical, not belief, but restraint. Restraint from checking. Restraint from interpreting. Restraint from managing an outcome that is not asking to be managed. Trust is not passive. It is active non-interference. It is the choice to let the process run without constantly interrupting it with your attention. It is the willingness to allow things to unfold without leaning forward emotionally. without pulling the future into the present through anxiety. This kind of trust does not come from confidence. It comes from regulation. When your nervous system feels safe, it does not need reassurance. When it feels unsafe, no amount of positive thinking will convince it to relax. This is why trust cannot be forced. You cannot tell yourself to trust and expect your body to comply. Trust emerges when the system learns, through experience, that nothing collapses when you stop watching. This learning happens slowly. It happens in moments where you choose not to check, where you notice the urge to monitor and let it pass, where you allow silence to exist without turning it into a problem. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The mind will protest. It will warn you that you are being careless, irresponsible, naive. But these warnings are echoes of an old survival strategy, not accurate assessments of the present moment. Surveillance was once necessary. It kept you alert. It helped you adapt. It may have protected you in environments where unpredictability meant danger. But what once protected you can now prevent you from receiving, because receiving requires openness, and openness cannot coexist with constant monitoring. When you are watching closely, you are not open. You are guarding. You are preparing to react rather than allowing yourself to be met. The universe responds to posture, not words. A posture of trust says, I am available, but I am not chasing. A posture of surveillance says, I am waiting, but I am not relaxed. These signals are subtle, but they matter. This is why outcomes often arrive when you stop checking for them. Not because you stopped wanting, but because you stopped interfering. When you stop monitoring, your nervous system settles into a baseline that is compatible with receiving. It no longer braces for disappointment. It no longer scans for threat. It becomes neutral, open, and responsive. This openness allows timing to organize itself naturally. Timing does not respond well to pressure. It responds to readiness. And readiness is not mental. It is somatic. It is the body's willingness to remain present without needing to know what comes next. It is the ability to stay with the unknown without tightening around it. This is what the quiet tests. Not whether you believe enough, not whether you affirm correctly, but whether you can remain steady when nothing confirms your expectations. Many people fail this test without realizing it. They interpret the lack of signs as a signal to try harder. They re-engage effort. They reactivate control. And in doing so, they postpone the very thing they are waiting for. The universe does not require your attention to work on your behalf. It requires your availability. Attention that watches, tracks, and evaluates is not availability. It is pressure. Availability is relaxed attention, the kind that is present without agenda, the kind that allows things to come and go without clinging or resisting. This is why trust feels like letting go of the steering wheel. Not because the road disappears, but because you are no longer white-knuckling every turn. Letting go does not mean you do nothing when action is needed. It means you do not act preemptively out of fear. It means you wait for clarity rather than forcing movement. Clarity arrives differently when trust is present. It feels quieter, less dramatic, more obvious. You do not need to convince yourself. You simply recognize what is next. And when nothing is next yet, trust allows you to rest in that truth without turning it into a crisis. This is the deepest form of faith. Not faith in a specific outcome, but faith in the intelligence of unfolding. Faith that does not need proof. Faith that does not demand updates. Faith that is not threatened by silence. If you find yourself overthinking during quiet periods, do not judge yourself. Notice instead what the overthinking is trying to accomplish. It is trying to protect you from uncertainty. Thank it for its service. And then gently let it know that protection is no longer required. Nothing is wrong because nothing is happening. Stillness is not absence. It is space. And space is where timing arranges itself without force. Trust, in its truest form, is not hope for a better future. It is peace with the present moment, even when the future is undefined. It is the decision to stop checking the door every minute and allow it to open when it is meant to. When you stop monitoring, you do not miss what is coming. You make room for it. And when it arrives, it does not feel like a surprise. It feels like recognition, because you were not watching for it. You were ready for it. That is trust, not hope, not belief, but the absence of surveillance. And in that absence, life moves freely again. 8. Identity is always prepared, before the outcome. There is a truth that reveals itself only after you have lived long enough to see patterns repeat, arrive, collapse, and return again in different forms. And that truth is this: outcomes do not fail because they are wrong. They fail because the identity that receives them is not yet stable enough to hold them. This is difficult to accept at first, especially when you have worked hard, waited patiently, and finally seen something you wanted appear, only to watch it dissolve, slip away, or turn into another source of anxiety instead of fulfillment. When this happens, the mind searches for external explanations: timing, other people, circumstances, luck. But beneath all of that, there is often a quieter reason. The internal identity was not ready. Identity is not just how you describe yourself. It is the baseline state your nervous system recognizes as normal. It is what feels familiar, safe, and predictable to your body, even if that familiarity includes stress, struggle, or limitation. The brain is not designed to pursue happiness. It is designed to protect what it knows. Anything that moves too far beyond the known baseline is interpreted as a potential threat, not because it is bad, but because it is unfamiliar. And when something unfamiliar arrives too quickly, the nervous system reacts automatically. It tightens, it scans, it looks for what could go wrong. This is where self-sabotage begins, not as a conscious choice, but as an unconscious attempt to return to what feels safe. You might receive abundance and suddenly feel pressure to manage it. You might enter a loving relationship and feel an urge to withdraw. You might step into visibility and feel an impulse to shrink. From the outside, this looks irrational. From the inside, it is protective. The system is trying to preserve identity. This is why preparation happens before the outcome, not after. Because once something arrives, it is too late to suddenly expand capacity. The response is already underway. Life understands this in a way the mind often does not. So instead of delivering what you ask for immediately, it focuses on adjusting the internal conditions that will allow the result to stay. This adjustment does not look like achievement. It looks like subtle shifts. Urgency begins to soften. The constant pressure to get somewhere fades. The need to control outcomes loosens its grip. These changes can feel unsettling because urgency once felt like purpose. Control once felt like safety. Presence can feel unfamiliar if your identity was shaped around effort. But presence is exactly what prepares identity. Presence teaches the nervous system that nothing terrible happens when you are not pushing. It shows the body that safety does not depend on constant vigilance. It allows the system to settle into a wider range of experience without panicking. This settling is not dramatic. It is quiet and cumulative. Over time, your baseline shifts. What once felt extraordinary begins to feel normal. What once felt threatening begins to feel manageable. What once triggered fear begins to trigger curiosity instead. This is identity expanding, and it cannot be rushed. If you try to force expansion through willpower, the body resists. If you try to convince yourself through thought, the deeper patterns remain unchanged. Identity changes only when the nervous system learns, through repeated experience, that it is safe to be in a new state. This is why preparation often involves less doing, not more. Less managing, less proving, less fixing. The system needs consistency, not intensity. Reducing urgency is one of the most important aspects of this process. Urgency signals lack. It tells the body that something is missing and must be obtained quickly to restore safety. Presence signals sufficiency. It tells the body that this moment is survivable, that nothing needs to be resolved immediately. As presence increases, control naturally relaxes. Control is the attempt to manage uncertainty. When uncertainty no longer feels dangerous, control becomes unnecessary. This does not mean you stop caring or taking responsibility. It means you stop gripping life so tightly that it cannot move. An identity that is always controlling is fragile. It depends on constant effort to maintain itself. An identity grounded in presence is resilient. It can adapt without collapsing. This resilience is what allows outcomes to stabilize. When something new arrives, an identity that has been prepared does not overreact. It does not immediately question whether it deserves it. It does not anticipate loss before enjoyment. It does not rush to manage every detail. It simply receives. Receiving is a skill most people were never taught. It requires openness without grasping, appreciation without fear, engagement without possession. These qualities do not come from belief. They come from regulation. That is why the preparation phase often feels slower than expected. Life is not testing your patience. It is training your capacity. Capacity is invisible. You cannot point to it or measure it easily, but it determines everything. A large outcome delivered to a small capacity will overwhelm. A powerful opportunity delivered to an unstable identity will destabilize. So life waits, not because it doubts you, but because it respects the integrity of the system. You may notice during this phase that your reactions change. You respond less dramatically. You recover more quickly. You are less consumed by anticipation or fear. These are signs that identity is stabilizing. Nothing flashy needs to happen for this work to be real. In fact, the quieter it is, the more likely it is to last. When identity has been prepared, outcomes do not feel shocking. They feel natural. You do not ask, "How did this happen?" You think, "Of course this makes sense now." This sense of inevitability is not arrogance. It is coherence. It is the alignment between who you are and what you experience. So if you are in a phase where urgency is dissolving, where control is loosening, where presence is becoming more accessible, even if it feels unfamiliar, recognize this as preparation, not delay. Your system is being taught how to live in a reality that once felt out of reach. Nothing is being withheld. Nothing is being tested. Identity is being widened so that when the outcome arrives, it does not have to be defended, controlled, or feared. It can simply be lived. This is why the work happens first on the inside, not as punishment, not as proof, but as care. Life is careful with what it gives you. It wants what arrives to stay. And for that to happen, you must be ready not just to receive, but to remain. That readiness is being built now, quietly, patiently, without spectacle. Trust that this preparation is not wasted time. It is the reason what comes next will not collapse under its own weight. Identity always comes first. The outcome follows when it finally has a home that can hold it. 9. Mild boredom is a sign you are leaving the old ego. There is a quiet experience that often appears during deep inner change, one that many people mislabel and rush to fix, because it does not look like growth as we were taught to recognize it. It feels like a soft boredom, a lack of excitement toward things that once energized you, a gentle disinterest that is not heavy enough to be despair and not sharp enough to be pain, just a sense that something familiar no longer works. When this happens, the first reaction of the mind is concern. It asks whether something is wrong, whether you are losing passion, whether life is becoming smaller instead of larger. It may even label this state as depression, because it does not understand what else to call a loss of stimulation. But this mild boredom is not collapse. It is release. The ego has always relied on stimulation to define itself. It uses desire, conflict, ambition, comparison, urgency, and even suffering as tools to feel real. When these tools stop working, the ego does not quietly step aside. It becomes confused. This confusion shows up as boredom. When old loops no longer excite you, the ego loses its familiar reference points. The patterns that once created identity no longer generate the same chemical or emotional response. The chase feels empty. The drama feels unnecessary. Even the struggles that once gave life a sense of meaning begin to feel repetitive and thin. This is not because life has become dull. It is because you are no longer being driven by outdated mechanisms. Mild boredom appears when the system stops responding to old stimuli but has not yet reorganized around new ones. It is the gap between identities, experienced not as pain, but as neutrality with awareness. This state is often misunderstood because we live in a culture that equates interest with aliveness and stimulation with purpose. If something does not excite you, the assumption is that it has no value. If you are not chasing something, the assumption is that you are stuck. But boredom is not always a lack of life. Sometimes it is the absence of manipulation. When the ego loses its grip, it no longer knows how to provoke reaction. It can no longer pull you into familiar cycles of wanting, resisting, proving, or fixing. Without those cycles, the emotional noise quiets, and what remains can feel strangely flat. Yet this flatness is not emptiness. It is freedom without direction yet. Think of how a child outgrows a toy. One day, the toy that once absorbed all attention simply does not do anything anymore. There is no dramatic moment, no explanation, just a loss of interest. The toy did not change. The child did. In the same way, many of the pursuits that once animated your life may lose their charge not because they were wrong, but because they were temporary tools for a stage you have completed. The ego, however, does not like endings without replacements. It wants continuity. It wants to know what comes next immediately. So when boredom appears, it panics and tries to stimulate itself back into relevance. It may urge you to create new desires just to feel alive again. It may push you toward distractions, habits, or emotional intensity. It may even generate dissatisfaction with your current life, hoping that dissatisfaction will restore movement. But this restlessness is not guidance. It is withdrawal. What you are experiencing is not the absence of meaning, but the dissolution of borrowed meaning. The meanings that once came from comparison, achievement, identity, and struggle are loosening their hold. This is why the boredom feels mild rather than crushing. It is not grief. It is not despair. It is simply the system noticing that old hooks no longer attach. This is an important distinction. Depression carries heaviness, hopelessness, and contraction. This state carries lightness, neutrality, and space. Even if the mind finds it uncomfortable, you may still function well. You may still care about people and responsibilities. You may still experience moments of peace or appreciation. What is missing is the compulsive drive that once defined you, and that is not a loss. It is maturation. The ego thrives on intensity because intensity creates a sense of self. When intensity fades, the ego feels threatened, not because something bad is happening, but because it is no longer needed in the same way. This is where many people misinterpret the signal and try to revive the old self. They chase stimulation. They manufacture problems. They create urgency where none exists. But doing so pulls them back into patterns they have already outgrown. If you allow this mild boredom to exist without judgment, something subtle begins to happen. Your attention shifts from stimulation to presence. You become less interested in what provokes reaction and more interested in what feels true. This shift is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not feel exciting at first, but it is profound. Presence does not entertain the ego. It dissolves it. When you are present, you do not need constant novelty to feel alive. You do not need conflict to feel engaged. You do not need struggle to feel meaningful. This is deeply unfamiliar for many people, especially those who learned early on that intensity was the price of existence. So boredom becomes the threshold. On one side is the old ego, fueled by reaction and repetition. On the other side is a quieter state of being that does not yet have a clear shape. Standing at this threshold can feel disorienting. There is nothing pulling you forward, but there is also nothing pulling you back. The old world feels done. The new world has not yet revealed itself. This is not a mistake. It is a transition. The boredom is not asking you to fix it. It is asking you to stay with it. If you stay, without rushing to replace it with stimulation, a new kind of interest begins to form. Not interest driven by lack or desire, but interest driven by resonance. You may notice curiosity returning in softer ways. A pull toward simplicity, a desire for depth rather than excitement, an appreciation for ordinary moments that once felt unremarkable. This is the new self beginning to orient, but it cannot emerge while the old ego is constantly demanding entertainment. It needs quiet. It needs space. It needs time without pressure. The boredom is part of that space. It signals that you are no longer being controlled by outdated parts of yourself. Those parts are losing authority. They no longer dictate what matters. This can feel strange because for so long, they defined you. Without them, who are you? This question does not need an immediate answer. In fact, trying to answer it too quickly pulls you back into identity construction rather than identity integration. The self that is emerging is not built through excitement. It is discovered through presence, and presence often feels boring to the ego because it does not feed on it. So if you notice this mild boredom in your life, resist the urge to label it as something wrong. Notice instead what no longer controls you, what no longer hooks your attention, what no longer dictates your sense of worth. These are signs of freedom, not loss. You are not becoming empty. You are becoming less manipulated. The old ego is stepping aside, not dramatically, but quietly, because it has nothing left to offer you. Its tools no longer work. What comes next will not be louder. It will be truer, and it will not arrive through stimulation, but through clarity. Until then, allow the boredom to exist. It is not a void. It is a passage out of the old self and into a way of being that does not need constant excitement to feel alive. This is not the end of meaning. It is the end of borrowed meaning. And in that ending, something more real has room to begin. 10. Reality does not come to convince you. It comes when you are compatible. There is a subtle shift that happens when you have been on this path long enough. A shift that changes how you understand manifestation, effort, and even faith, because you begin to see that reality is not interested in persuading you, reassuring you, or proving anything to your mind. Reality responds to compatibility, not belief. And this distinction changes everything. So many people assume that preparation is about convincing themselves harder, believing more strongly, or eliminating doubt entirely. They think the work is to reach a mental state where uncertainty disappears and confidence becomes unshakable. But that state is rare, unnatural, and often temporary, because the mind is designed to question, not to rest. Reality does not wait for certainty. It waits for congruence. Congruence means that your inner state no longer contradicts itself. Not that you never question, but that questioning no longer destabilizes you. Not that you never desire, but that desire no longer pulls you into lack. Not that you never doubt, but that doubt no longer triggers control. When you oscillate between wanting and doubting, the system sends mixed signals. Part of you reaches forward, another part pulls back. One layer hopes, another braces for disappointment. This oscillation is exhausting, not because it is wrong, but because it keeps you incompatible with what you are asking to experience. Reality does not respond to intensity. It responds to stability. When the internal system stabilizes, something quiet but unmistakable happens. The need for reassurance fades. The urge to check softens. The compulsion to monitor timing loosens. Not because you forced yourself to stop, but because there is nothing left to defend against. This is what preparation is actually doing. It is not trying to make you believe. It is teaching your system how to live without contradiction. As long as part of you is reaching while another part is resisting, outcomes cannot settle. They may appear briefly, tease possibility, then dissolve, not as punishment, but as feedback. The system is not ready yet. Compatibility means that when something arrives, you do not tighten around it. You do not immediately wonder how to keep it. You do not ask how long it will last. You do not scan for signs that it might be taken away. Those reactions are not flaws. They are signs of misalignment between experience and identity. Preparation works by softening these reactions before the outcome appears, not after. This is why the quiet phases matter so much. They remove the distractions that keep you oscillating. They expose the subtle tensions you were using to motivate yourself. They reveal where you still equate urgency with importance and control with safety. As these tensions dissolve, compatibility increases. And when compatibility is present, reality does not arrive dramatically. It arrives naturally. You do not feel surprised. You do not feel overwhelmed. You do not feel the need to celebrate prematurely or protect yourself from disappointment. It feels obvious. This obviousness is often misunderstood. People expect manifestation to feel miraculous, emotional, or explosive. But when something truly matches your internal state, it does not shock you. It fits. You think, of course this happened. Of course this makes sense now. Of course this is the next step. This is not arrogance. It is coherence. Reality did not need to convince you because there was no resistance left to overcome. Think about moments in your life when something arrived and stayed. Not the things that came and went, but the things that integrated seamlessly. Those moments likely did not come with a rush of emotion. They came with calm recognition. That calm is the signature of compatibility. When you are compatible with an experience, you do not ask whether it is real. You live it. When you are compatible with a relationship, you do not constantly test it. You participate in it. When you are compatible with a new level of responsibility, you do not feel crushed by it. You carry it naturally. This is why preparation focuses so much on reducing internal conflict. The mind wants answers. The nervous system wants safety. The ego wants control. Preparation gently teaches these parts to stop fighting each other. When the nervous system feels safe enough, it stops demanding certainty. When the ego feels less threatened, it stops micromanaging outcomes. When the mind senses coherence, it relaxes its grip on explanation. None of this happens through force. It happens through lived experience of not collapsing when nothing is resolved. Over time, you learn something essential. You learn that not knowing does not harm you. You learn that silence does not erase progress. You learn that uncertainty is survivable. These lessons change your posture toward life. You stop leaning forward emotionally. You stop pulling the future into the present. You stop living as if something must happen soon in order for you to be okay. And in that posture, compatibility emerges. Reality does not reward desperation. It does not respond to pressure. It aligns with readiness. Readiness is not enthusiasm. It is steadiness. It is the ability to receive without flinching, to experience without immediately trying to manage, to allow without clinging. This is why preparation often feels like losing something before gaining anything. You lose the drama of anticipation. You lose the thrill of imagining. You lose the identity of the one who is waiting. But what you gain is capacity. Capacity to be present. Capacity to remain open. Capacity to live what arrives, rather than just wanting it. When this capacity is in place, reality does not need to prove itself to you. It does not need to send signs. It does not need to persuade your doubt. It simply shows up as the next logical expression of who you have become. This is the moment when seeking ends, not because you stopped caring, but because there is nothing left to seek. The experience matches the inner state. If you are still waiting for proof, still checking for reassurance, still needing confirmation, nothing is wrong. It only means preparation is ongoing. Compatibility cannot be rushed. It is built through repeated moments of staying present when the mind wants resolution. Every time you choose not to oscillate between hope and fear, compatibility strengthens. Every time you allow uncertainty without tightening, compatibility deepens. Every time you resist the urge to control timing, compatibility stabilizes. Eventually, the system settles, and when it does, reality moves without announcement. No build-up, no warning, no drama, just arrival. You may look back later and realize that what came did not change you. It revealed you, because you were already living at that frequency internally. The outer world simply caught up. Reality does not come to convince you. It comes when there is nothing left to convince. When you are no longer split between wanting and resisting. When you are no longer negotiating with the future. When you are no longer monitoring life for signs. It comes when you are compatible. And when it does, you do not feel victorious. You feel settled, as if something finally arrived home. That is how you know the preparation worked. Not because something appeared, but because it stayed. And it stayed because you were ready to live it without tension. That is compatibility. And that is when reality responds. 11. When preparation is complete, you are no longer waiting. There is a moment that arrives quietly, so quietly that many people miss it at first, because it does not announce itself with excitement or relief. And it does not feel like victory or arrival. It feels like something has loosened. A pressure that was always there has softened. A tightness you did not realize you were carrying has released. You are no longer desperate, not because everything has resolved, but because desperation no longer feels necessary. You are no longer scanning your life for signs, no longer measuring time the same way, no longer asking the same questions with the same urgency. The need to know has eased. Not because you finally received answers, but because the system no longer believes answers are required for safety. This is how you know preparation is nearing completion. You react less. Things that once triggered spirals now pass through with less charge. Situations that once demanded immediate interpretation now feel neutral enough to wait. You still care, but you do not grip. Control begins to loosen, not as a decision, but as a natural consequence of feeling more settled inside yourself. When the nervous system no longer perceives threat in uncertainty, control loses its function. You do not need to manage what no longer feels dangerous. This shift is subtle, but it is profound. For a long time, waiting was not just something you did. It was who you were. Waiting meant hoping. Waiting meant bracing. Waiting meant staying alert in case something went wrong or passed you by. Waiting kept you tense. But now, waiting dissolves. Not because the future suddenly arrives, but because the present becomes sufficient. You are here without constantly leaning forward emotionally. You are engaged without anticipating collapse. You are present without demanding reassurance. This is not resignation. It is integration. Manifestation, at this stage, does not arrive like fireworks. There is no explosion of emotion, no dramatic sense that everything has changed overnight. Instead, it shows up as a natural transition, almost understated, like stepping from one room into another without realizing you crossed a threshold. It feels obvious in hindsight. This is because the observer has stopped oscillating. As long as the observer vibrates between desire and doubt, hope and fear, anticipation and vigilance, reality remains unstable. The field does not collapse because the internal signal keeps shifting. The system cannot settle. But when that oscillation ends, when vigilance no longer disguises itself as responsibility or caution, something locks into place. Doubt does not disappear entirely. It simply loses authority. You may still have thoughts that question. You may still notice moments of uncertainty, but they do not hijack the system. They do not demand action. They do not pull you back into control. They pass. This passing is new. Before, every doubt felt like a call to respond, to fix, to correct course. Now, doubt is just another mental event, not a directive. It no longer defines your relationship with life. This is the sign that preparation has done its work. The observer has stabilized. And when the observer stabilizes, reality no longer needs to wait. This is why manifestation feels ordinary at this stage. It does not feel like something you earned. It does not feel like something you forced into existence. It feels like the next reasonable expression of your life. You do not marvel at it. You do not clutch it. You do not test it. You live it. This is what people often misunderstand. They expect manifestation to feel overwhelming, euphoric, or validating. But when something truly matches your internal state, it does not shock you. It fits. It integrates without friction. The absence of fireworks is not a lack of significance. It is proof of coherence. Think about the moments in your life that truly lasted, the relationships that became stable, the roles you grew into naturally, the decisions that did not require endless justification. Those moments likely did not come with anxiety or exhilaration. They came with calm recognition. That calm is the signature of readiness. When preparation is complete, you stop checking the clock. Time loses its emotional weight. Days pass without being measured against expectation. You are no longer waiting for life to begin, because life is already happening. This does not mean you stop dreaming or aspiring. It means dreaming no longer feels like escape. It means aspiration no longer feels like compensation for lack. You want from fullness, not from hunger. This is the difference. Desire from hunger keeps you waiting. Desire from fullness keeps you grounded. At this stage, even if nothing dramatic has changed externally yet, you feel different internally. And that difference matters more than any visible result. You trust without effort. You allow without forcing. You move when movement feels right. And you rest without guilt when it does not. There is no internal debate about whether you are doing enough. That question has lost relevance. The system no longer needs to prove its worth through action. This is why preparation often ends before results appear. The inner shift happens first. The outer world follows. And when it follows, it does so smoothly. You may notice opportunities appearing without tension, connections forming without pursuit, changes unfolding without disruption. These are not coincidences. They are the natural consequence of a stabilized observer. Reality mirrors the internal environment. When that environment is calm, open, and coherent, reality does not need to be dramatic to be meaningful. Many people miss this stage because they are still looking for signs of arrival. They are waiting for a feeling of completion, a sense of being done, a final confirmation that the work is over. But there is no ceremony. The work ends when it is no longer needed. You simply notice that you are no longer waiting. That noticing often comes later, in retrospect, when you realize that the urgency faded and never returned. This is not because you gave up. It is because you arrived, not at a destination, but at a way of being. From this place, life feels less like something you are trying to unlock and more like something you are participating in. You are responsive rather than reactive, engaged rather than vigilant, present rather than projected into the future. This presence is not passive, it is deeply alive. It allows you to meet what comes without distortion, to respond without panic, to receive without tightening. This is why the final phase of preparation feels like relief without excitement, like peace without explanation, like trust without effort. Nothing needs to happen for you to feel okay. And because of that, everything is finally free to happen. When you are no longer waiting, life no longer has to hurry. When you are no longer watching, reality no longer has to perform. It simply unfolds, quietly, naturally, in its own time, and you meet it without surprise, because you have already become the kind of person who can live it. That is the completion, not the arrival of something external, but the settling of something internal. When the observer stops vibrating, the world stabilizes. When vigilance releases its grip, doubt loses its power. When preparation completes, waiting ends, and what comes next does not feel like a reward. It feels like continuity, like the most obvious next step in a life that no longer needs to prove itself. That is how you know. You are not anticipating. You are not managing. You are not bracing. You are here. And from here, life moves with you, not ahead of you, not against you, but alongside you. Preparation did not bring you something. It brought you back to yourself. And from that place, nothing feels delayed. Everything feels aligned. You were never delayed. What you once asked for was not denied. It was not overlooked. And it did not arrive late. It has been waiting, patiently and precisely, not for a better moment, but for a steadier home. It has been waiting for an identity that could live inside it without fear, without suspicion, without the constant need to check whether it is real or about to disappear. This is the part that is hardest to accept, because the mind wants timelines and guarantees, while life works with readiness and capacity. What you asked for did not require more wanting, it required a different way of being. Preparation completes, not when proof appears, but when the demand for proof fades. As long as you needed signs to reassure you, the system was still unstable. As long as you watched closely, monitored timing, and checked for confirmation, a part of you was still bracing for disappointment. And anything that arrives into a braced system becomes fragile. This is why life slowed things down, not to withhold, but to protect, not to test you, but to train your capacity to receive without panic. If your life feels quiet right now, if the days pass without dramatic shifts or obvious markers of progress, it does not mean nothing is happening. Quiet is not absence. It is organization. It is the buffer zone where things are rearranged gently rather than forced into place. It is the pause that prevents collapse. It is the space where what is coming is being prepared to stay. You may have thought that preparation would feel like effort, discipline, or improvement, but real preparation often feels like less urgency, less control, less emotional charge around outcomes. These reductions are not losses, they are stabilizers. They allow your system to hold more without breaking. The identity you are stepping into does not need to struggle to feel real. It does not need tension to stay alert. It does not need constant reassurance to trust life. It knows how to be present without gripping the future. It knows how to receive without immediately asking how long it will last. It knows how to live what arrives rather than defend it. This identity is not built through force. It is revealed through stillness. That is why the silence mattered. That is why the waiting dissolved before the outcome arrived. That is why things began to feel lighter before anything visibly changed. You did not miss your moment. You were being reoriented so that when the moment came, it would not overwhelm you. Look back gently and you may notice how much has already shifted, not in circumstances, but in posture. You react less. You chase less. You try to control less. You tolerate uncertainty more. You allow questions to remain unanswered without turning them into emergencies. You stay with the present moment instead of constantly leaning into the future. These changes are quiet, but they are foundational. They are the reason what comes next will not feel like a threat or a test. It will feel livable. Many people reach what they asked for and immediately lose it. Not because they were undeserving, but because they were unprepared. Their identity was still organized around lack, vigilance, or fear. You were spared that experience. Life did not rush to give you something you would have had to fight to keep. It waited until keeping no longer required a fight. This is not delay. This is care. If you are tempted to measure your progress by what has not yet appeared, pause and notice what no longer controls you. Notice what no longer triggers panic. Notice how much quieter your inner world has become. These are not side effects. They are the work. The absence of urgency is not complacency. It is readiness. The absence of desperation is not indifference. It is trust that no longer needs to prove itself. When preparation completes, you stop asking when. You stop negotiating with the future. You stop watching life like it might disappoint you at any moment. And in that stopping, something aligns. Reality does not need to announce itself when alignment is present. It simply continues, smoothly, naturally, without drama. You may not even recognize the moment of arrival. You may realize it later, looking back, noticing that you are living what you once hoped for without thinking about it anymore. That is the clearest sign. What arrives does not feel extraordinary. It feels appropriate. It fits the person you have become. This is why the end of preparation does not feel like celebration. It feels like relief without excitement, like peace without explanation, like coming home without needing to announce that you have arrived. You were never behind. You were never off track. You were not forgotten by life or bypassed by timing. You were being prepared. Prepared to live without bracing. Prepared to receive without suspicion. Prepared to stay present even when things go well. That preparation mattered more than speed. If nothing dramatic happens tomorrow, nothing has gone wrong. If the quiet continues a little longer, trust that it is finishing its work. Things do not collapse when they arrive into a stable system. They settle, and when they settle, they do not need to be defended. You do not need to hold yourself together anymore. You do not need to prove readiness. You do not need to make anything happen. What was meant for you is not rushing, because it is not at risk of missing you. It is aligning with you. You are not being delayed. You are being prepared. And when preparation completes, life does not surprise you. It meets you, calmly, naturally, as the next obvious step in a life that no longer needs to hurry. If you want, I can continue by shaping this into a full narrated YouTube script with pacing and pauses, adapting it for a sleep time audience, or transforming it into a series format that unfolds across multiple episodes.